Thank you for the opportunity to be here. Nice bright lights gets us up all early this morning. I want to just give you a little bit of background about who we are, and I also want to give you a heads up that I tend to move around in these presentations, and I actually tend to get the audience a little bit involved. So we're going to do that first. We are the Connect with Kids Education Network. We're based out of Atlanta, as you just heard. We work with school systems all around the country in three primary areas: social and emotional learning, parent engagement, and we also have recently gotten very, very involved in culturally relevant or culturally responsive, different people call it different things, education. Is anybody here aware of CRE or involved in CRE? I see a few hands. This is something that you're going to be seeing sweeping more and more across the country. It really focuses on underserved minority populations and how to work with them in schools to keep them in school. We are very, very involved in dropout prevention. We work with everybody, school districts from New York City Department of Ed, where we're very heavily involved up there, all the way to Hawaii, to the Grand Caymans, back to Atlanta. So we are very much in this space. We are an evidence-based company. All of our programming on SEL is actually evidence-based. We're on the What Works Clearinghouse for the U.S. Department of Education as an effective producer of programs. Our drug and alcohol programs on the National Registry of Evidence-Based Practices and Programs for SAMHSA. So everything that you're going to hear today in this presentation is based in the research. The other piece is just a little bit about my background. I'm a co-founder and CEO of the organization. I come out of the communications field, so we believe very strongly that you can be doing great work, but you also need to be communicating that work to the populations that you serve, and that these kinds of topics very much are about bringing communities together. So in our company, we work a lot with districts also to communicate the strategies that they have in place and making sure that they have the impact nationwide that we need to see. The second piece is I'm also an attorney. I worked in juvenile justice, and that's really how this company was formed. We understood when I was working in juvenile justice that two things, and I want you to hear this today. Number one, most kids are very resilient. You guys know this because you're in the field. When we can get kids the proper services, when we can keep them in schools, when we can put adults around them that can guide them, they are pretty resilient. Number two, most parents love their children. They may not be doing their best by their children, or maybe they are doing their best. They may not have the resources, they may not have the education, they may not have the tools, but most parents want something better for their kids. So Connect with Kids was formed to actually begin to work with school systems and communities to bring the resources both to the classroom and to parents that will help keep kids in school, keep them healthy, help them achieve academically, but also help them achieve socially and emotionally, help them achieve in life. So that's who we are. Angela Tagliarini is here with me today. She's up here in the front. And if after the presentation you'd like to learn more about what we do or get some more information or materials, we're happy to provide that to you. Okay, so let's get started. So I want to get started today because we're going to talk today about what is happening culturally in this country. And what the research is showing is shifting. But I want to get started by asking you guys a couple of questions first. How many of you have been in the business for more than 10 years? Raise your hands. There we go. How many more than 20? How many more than 30? Any 40-year veterans? Do I see a couple of hands? Wow. 45? Okay, those 40-year veterans, 45 in the back, all right. 40 and 45 and 50, stand up. Let's give you a hand. All right. Now, y'all got to help me out here a little bit, okay? Because I'm going to walk into some tables. For those of you who've been around a while, more than 10 years, 20 years, I want to ask you, what's changed? What has changed in terms of working with children, and what has changed in terms of working with parents? Do I have a volunteer? Yep, okay, great. Stand up.
The breakdown of the family. 40 to 50 years ago, there were much more family relationships. And when you called home, you probably spoke to someone with the same last name as the child you were calling about. Not true today.
Okay, the breakdown of the family. What else? Yeah.
I think parents these days don't allow students to deal with or teach them good coping skills. I think they jump in very quickly. I think they use medication often to solve their problems. I think that's a big change from when I first started.
Parents today don't teach kids coping skills. What else? Yeah, come on up. Come on up.
I would say the village has changed. You know, remember it takes a village, but the village is sick, and they're not around anymore.
The village is sick. That's interesting. The village has changed, and they are not around anymore. Anybody else? Yeah.
The influences, all the stimulations, is not, as she said, at first all you had was your family, and they were your main influence. Now you have the whole world, you have the internet, you have social media. So you have too much stimulation that's showing you the way.
The influences have changed. Okay, let me ask you this. How many of you in the audience are parents? Okay, great. So the majority of the audience is also parents. If I were to say to you, when your child leaves your home, and for those of you who are not parents, think about this as an educator and think about it as a parent as well. When your child turns 18, or the child that you're working with turns 18 and goes out into the world, what attributes will he or she have in her bag? What things will he or she possess that you can say, I've done my job well, and they are on track for a happy, healthy, high-functioning life? What attributes will they possess? Anybody? Faith. Just yell them out and I'll say it. Resilience. Work ethic. Leadership. Character. Empathy. Respect. Responsibility. What? Organization. Self-confidence and boundaries. Integrity. Wow. You're a great group. What I want you to hear is all those things that you said we call the A list. Okay? And interestingly, we speak all over the country and work with parents and school districts and administrators, and guess what? No matter whether I am in New York City Department of Ed, in some of the worst, most difficult, most underserved, stressed out neighborhoods in the country, or I am in an affluent private school population, what do you think when we ask that question happens? It's always the same list. The list is always, always the same. Now, isn't that interesting? Because no one said test scores. Right? I'm trying to make my PowerPoint work here, and I'm having a little trouble. No one said test scores. No one said an A in math. No one said the highest score on the SAT and the best possible college that they could get into, did they? Right? Nobody said captain of the soccer team. Nobody said if they are the most popular kid in school, that's really going to work for us. Nobody said if we know they will make $250,000 a year and can have a nice house and a 3-car garage, we are rocking and ready to go. This kid is going to make it. But what's interesting about what's happening in America is that we are living in a great paradox. Because if you talk to us, and our generation, and some of you are much younger than me, we always have the same list. And our list is a list of intrinsic, internal values. But what do you think happens if you ask kids, according to the research, what are the 3 things that are going to make them the happiest and give them the best chance of success when they graduate high school? What do you think the answers are? Somebody yell something out. Money is number 1. What do you think's number 2? Car? Nope. Who said fame? You're right. Money and fame is what kids will tell you is happening, is going to make them have the best chance of success. It's interesting what's happening in our country, and it's really, really important for us to understand this because there is a great cultural shift that we are living through in America. And there we go. Okay, you can see it up on the screen. So I want to talk to you today about that cultural shift, how it's impacting our children, and what we can do about it as schools and as individuals. And let me say this to you. I will say it now, and I will probably say it again at the end of the presentation. With the cultural shift that is going on, schools, I am passionate about believing that schools in this country, and particularly public schools, may be the only institution left that can right us back to where we need to be. We are living through a transition in this country that we are so up close and personal to that we don't even really know what's happening. But go into a room like this and ask people what's changed, and they can tell you about that transition because you see it every day in schools. But we haven't stepped back and evaluated that and say, what does that mean for us? And that's what we're going to do today. All right, you see the guy up on the screen? You guys know who this is, right? This is Mark Zuckerberg. He's the CEO of Facebook. In 2010, Mark Zuckerberg was named Man of the Year. And at that time, Time magazine wrote an editorial talking about why they named him Man of the Year. And at the top of that editorial, there was a quote that said, "On or about December of 1910, human character changed." Now, remember that A-list you just gave me? And all those things I called intrinsic values? They're also called character, right? A lot of the things that you yelled out were character traits. So, at the top of the Time magazine editorial, on or about December 1910, human character changed, that was a quote that was written by Virginia Woolf at the turn of the century. And what Virginia Woolf was talking about was a fundamental shift in human relations that was taking place at that time. Master-servant relationships were changing. Child labor laws were coming onto the scene. Women's rights were coming onto the scene. We were becoming a more industrialized nation. Those changes, she predicted, would bring about transformation in every single sphere of life, from religion to politics to human behavior. And what Time magazine would say is if we look back now, few would say that Virginia Woolf got it wrong. We changed as a country and as a people. But what Time magazine also said is now, in December of 2010, it's happening again. What technology is doing to us, good and bad, how we are becoming and evolving and communicating as individuals and as a country and a culture, we do not know the outcome of that yet. You are in a world and in a time that is like no other before it, and charged with helping students and students move through that time as educators. A century later, after Virginia Woolf had that quote, the way we connect with each other, our institutions, how we feel about our institutions, how we operate day to day is changing dramatically. There's an erosion of trust and authority. How many of you see this? You know, we just don't trust our public institutions like we used to. Parents don't rely on their teachers like they used to. The partnerships we used to have in communities where we were both helping raise the child. Who's the man who said the village is sick? I'd like to borrow that. I'm going to start using it. Because in a very short sentence, to some degree, that's what is happening. The village is changing. The village doesn't even really exist anymore, or the village as we knew it. Society is more crowded, more complex, more complicated than it has ever been before. And here's the part. Our children are just trying to figure it out. All they're trying to do is navigate and move through a world and be successful. Okay? So when we look at our kids and we get, I had a workshop yesterday and we talked about this in the workshop, and, you're mad at the kid and you're saying, come on, that kid won't do what I want him to do. Why is this kid doing that? I don't feel like I'm making any progress. These are just kids. They're living through a very difficult transition, a very interesting time. Heck, we're all living through that, and we know the stressors involved. And a lot of them are living through it without parental support, without mentoring, without guidance. And we are really, as has been said before, the quiet army on the ground. The quiet army on the ground. You are the quiet army on the ground that get up every single day, go to the job, make the commitment, do what you need to do in order to move these kids forward. We live in a society, to borrow from Charles Dickens, of two worlds, real and virtual. And for children, they live in real and virtual like nobody's else. They spend as much time in the virtual world as they do in the real world, maybe more. And here's the problem. The virtual world and the real world evolve and develop differently. The virtual world has no soul. The virtual world has no heart. The virtual world is run primarily for money. And so the rules of the virtual world, the things that work in the virtual world, don't always translate and necessarily work in the real world. Welcome to the world of social media, a place Dr. Donald Schifrin, who is a Bellevue, Washington-based pediatrician who served as the American Academy of Pediatrics Microsoft consultant, calls the world's largest cocktail party, where you'll encounter every kind of experience and personality imaginable. It's not necessarily good or bad, but it is a great, uncontrolled experiment on our children. We have no idea how this is going to impact them and what those outcomes are going to be. So what's interesting is that we tend to be concerned about outcomes in our society, right? Data, that's an outcome. Test scores are an outcome. Bullying is an outcome. Drugs and alcohol, outcome. Unprotected sex, outcome. Right? Any kind of high-risk behavior, outcome. Dropping out, outcome. Being disengaged, outcome. That's what we want to focus on. How do we fix those outcomes? What can we do? How do we round up all the kids and get them back in school? How do we, do drug and alcohol education so nobody does it anymore? Right? But what's happening is something that is much more profound, and it is much more of a problem. And so we have to solve that problem and deal with that issue, and then our outcomes, interestingly, change. We got to go to the core. And that is something in this country that we have not really been focused on. So I want to talk to you today about 2 research studies that have come out in the last 6 years. They came out pretty close together. They're some of the largest mental health studies that have been done in this country. One was out of San Diego State University by a woman by the name of Dr. Jean Twenge and a man by the name of Dr. Keith Campbell, who is also the head of the psychiatry department at the University of Georgia, or psychology department at the University of Georgia. And what they did is they went out and they took something called the MMPI. Is anybody familiar? Any social workers in the room? Yeah, okay. So the Minnesota Multiphasic Personality Index. Am I saying that right? Yeah. Doing it from memory. Which is a test for mental health that has been given to students since the 1930s. And they gathered up all that data, and they looked at what is going on with adolescents in this generation. And here's what they found. They found that kids today are 5 times as anxious and depressed as kids in the 1930s. In the Great Depression, when people didn't have enough to eat and children were actually quitting school and going to work to help their families, kids today are 5 times as anxious and depressed as those kids. And you might say, well, we're more aware. Mental health has got, more publicity. Well, no. The MMPI is a real personality index. And it actually, works with and has a control in it to factor against those kinds of issues. We are seeing more kids in this generation with mental health problems than we have ever seen before. It is at epidemic proportions, some say, in this country. 3 times as many mental health disorders in this population as kids in the 1950s that were in mental institutions. Now, I've given it away on the slides because some of you are reading the slides. But so anxiety and depression were 1 and 2. And those, as you guys know, are cousins. But what was interesting about the study is that for the first time ever, we saw narcissism pop as the 3rd mental health concern in this country among children. Does everybody here know what narcissism is? What's narcissism? Me. Thank you. I love this succinct answers. I don't know if it was the same guy, but me. It's all about me. Now, adolescents are all about me anyway, right? But these are kids that we are now seeing on the index and on the scale that have significant narcissism issues. Who knows what happens all the way at the bad end of the spectrum for a narcissist? What do they become? Who said that? Sociopaths, right. Now, I'm not saying we got a generation of teens and adolescents that are all going to become sociopaths, but narcissism is the track to that, right? And so the other key characteristics they found was that this is a competitive generation, a comparing generation, a generation with a false sense of reality and an inflated sense of expectations. Right? And so Twenge and Campbell sort of started rubbing their heads and looking further at the stats and saying, what in the world is going on in our country? A couple of other stats for you to know. 58% of college students scored higher on the narcissism scale than college students in 1982. 40% of millennials believe they should be promoted every 2 years. 3 times as many middle school girls want to be a personal assistant to a famous person as much as they want to be a senator or the CEO of an organization. They would pick, let me just be the assistant to, Lady Gaga. This is an interesting one. So convicted of their own greatness is that 60% of millennials believe in something called guided morality, which means that, you know what, I'll just kind of do the right thing based on how I feel. Right? It's just all sort of in the moment. Those statistics are same in the US and China, same in different socioeconomic brackets. This is not a socioeconomic issue. It is across the board. At the end of the day, the internet is a selfish technology. 70% check their phones every hour searching for likes. They inflate themselves on Facebook and Instagram to look good. There's a new acronym out, FOMO. All the kids know it. Somebody told me this morning they just learned it for the first time. Fear of missing out. They live in a fishbowl. Their lives are driven by a technology that sets up a false sense of comparison and a kind of competition that we never had to engage in. Now, what's interesting about it is that while all this is happening, and we're all focused on data and academic outcomes, not that academics are a bad thing, we're all about academics, and we're all about data, because I'm talking to you about research right now. Your empathy scores in America, your creativity scores in America, those are going down. Those are going down, and those have been consistently dropping in this country since 1998. Now, at about the same time, another study came out of USC, and it looked at how technology, and particularly what they call rapid-fire media, Snapchat, Facebook, Instagram, every kind of social media, actually impacts you emotionally. And what they came up with is they said, rapid-fire media can actually confuse your moral compass. What we know about human beings is that for some kind of thought and for some kind of decisions and some kind of value systems, all those traits that you mentioned out here, you have to have time. It takes time for me to develop a connection with you. It takes time for me to learn to respect you. That doesn't come like that. It takes time for me to look at another individual and get to know that person and really build empathy, caring, admiration. And when you're constantly in front of rapid-fire media and you can constantly move around and change those things, well, what they're saying is it's possible that you actually slow and maybe even destroy the growth and development of those kinds of values. Because I can always distract. I never have to be alone. I never have to be by myself. I never have to think internally. If you don't like me, you don't respond to me, you don't give me my like on Instagram, you don't respond to me on Facebook, I just go somewhere else. I tell myself that I have 1,000 friends on Facebook, and somehow that's going to work for me. So when we put kids, very young kids, I mean, have you been to the airport lately? I mean, I see kids that are 2 and 3 years old with a device in their hand and that are constantly being entertained. You know, my husband always says, you know, we're just going to entertain them to death. Every time our children, my children are grown now, but every time our children had an event, you know, we had a party. He said, how many parties can we go to in a year? How many times does he hit a ball and run to first base and we got to have a party? Right? So the study raises questions about the emotional cost, particularly for the developing brain, on a high ingestion of rapid-fire media. How is that impacting our kids? If things are happening too fast and you are always in those states, you may never fully experience emotion about other people's psychological states. So when they looked at all the data, and you look at a lot of researchers that are out there right now, and neurobiologists and sociologists and psychiatrists and psychologists, here's what they've sort of come up with. I mean, this is stacks of research. These 2 studies are 2 of my favorite just because they were comprehensive and they really looked at kids nationwide. But here's what they've come up with. Our society over the last several decades, and it depends on who you ask. Some people say it started around the 1940s. Some peg it at about the 1960s, has been shifting. And we have been moving from a society that focuses on intrinsic motivation and values to extrinsic motivation and values. Now, what does that mean? Well, when I was growing up, and that's a long time ago, my parents were mostly concerned about who I was, not what I was. My community, my church, synagogue, community groups, my neighborhood, my school system was concerned about who was the person that I was going to become. Was I going to be a good person? Was I going to be an adult? Was I going to be able to cope with adult life? It wasn't a whole lot about how I feel. My father never looked at me. I never remember my father looking at me, telling me to do something and saying, but first, how do you feel? It was a little bit, I mean, he was aware of me, but he needed me to become something more than that. He wanted to get me ready for adulthood, and my mother as well. And the whole community of America was focused on those things. There's a great book out that I highly recommend. It's a little bit long and hard to read. I don't know if you guys know who David Brooks is, but he writes for the New York Times. And he's published a book called The Road to Character. And he is immersed in the research around these issues. He's also written a book called The Social Animal, which is also, for those of you who like research and are sort of into that kind of thing, which I am, it's a great book. And it really looks at what's going on nationwide. So what they said is that we have moved from an intrinsic value system and an intrinsic motivational system to an extrinsic value system and motivational system. And what happens in extrinsic societies is that they become more competitive. It's all about the outcome. It's all about what college do I get into? What kind of scores did I get on the test? What kind of money do I have? I'm comparing myself constantly to everyone around me. It is a rat race. It's an effort to get ahead. And every parent feels that. We see parents now that all they want to do is make sure that Johnny got what Joey got, man. I don't care how I have to get it. Right? Because Johnny is going to have the same chance as Joey. Now remember this as just a principle of life. Comparison is the thief of happiness. Comparison is the thief of happiness. And our children live in a completely comparative world. They get up in the morning and they check their phones. Most of them sleep with their phones. How many likes did I get on Instagram? Who's responding to me on Facebook? Why is it that she had a party last night and I didn't go? There's this constant feeling through technology. We have a look into the world around us that we've never had before, and through social media, we can really monitor ourselves 24/7 against the Joneses. And many adults are in that game as well. How many of you have got a Facebook site or an Instagram site? You know what I'm talking about. You know how it feels a little weird for us, but we bring a different set of life skills to the party. We at least bring that value system that you listed before. So we've moved to an extrinsic society, and that is not only impacting us in our individual day-to-day lives, but it's also true for our institutions. How are you guys, those of you who work in schools, how are you judged? Data, right? All about the outcomes, all about the statistics, all we're getting ahead, what has happened to us socially and emotionally, what kind of relationships are we building, what are we connecting on, what kind of value systems do we have? It's gone. Not gone, but it's taken a very, very interesting second, third, or fourth place. Yet when we go out into the world at large and ask these questions, everybody has the same list. It's fascinating. Everybody has the same list. So why do we care that this value system has changed? Why do we care about that? Who wants to take a stab at that? When I ask you what your children need in their bag, and you give me the list of all the things you just told me, why is it that you come up with that list? Why not just let them be little narcissists and run around? Why do we care? Make a lot of money. Who knows the answer to that? Somebody? We care about the future of our society and who we are as a people. That's a really great point because there are two issues here. A, I care about my kid, right? I want my kid to be healthy and happy. B, I care about what kind of future generation we're building that is going to make the world a better place, right? And here's the thing. The extrinsic society, the materialistic society, the competitive, comparative society does not get you there. What we know as adults is that it gets harder, right? Life gets tougher. People lose their jobs, people die, people have problems, they have money problems, they get divorced. It rarely goes as planned. And what gets you up in the morning? What makes you committed to a family? What makes you committed to a community? What makes you operate in the day-to-day world? Is that A-list. That A-list allows you to cope. That A-list allows you to not call mama 5 times a day when you go off to college. That A-list gives you an internal sense of not only values, but motivations that keep you going, keep you happy and healthy. We cannot control our outcomes. We can influence our outcomes, but we can't completely control our outcomes. What we can control is what internally motivates us, moves us, and takes us through life. I use my husband as an example for this. My husband's from a small town in Arkansas. He plays the guitar. He plays by ear. And he has been playing since he was a little boy. And when he comes home from work every night, for pretty much the whole time we've been married for 26 years, he has gone into a room by himself and played that guitar. He does not want me to listen. He does not need an audience. He does not need everybody to tell him how fantastic he is. He also has a beautiful voice, and he sings, but he does not care to sing for you. Why does he play? Yeah, he plays for himself. It's an internal motivation for him. It's an internal, intrinsic value. Now, my son, who's much older now and doesn't mind that I tell this story, when he was about 15 or 16, he decided he was not going to play the guitar because his dad did, but he was going to play the keyboards. Now, my husband's been playing all of his life. He's a very good guitarist, every day, all of his life. Not every day, but most days. And my son comes to my husband and I, and he says, look, I really want to learn to play the keyboards. Dad plays the guitar. We said, great. And he said, but, I'd like to buy this keyboard online. I'd like to see if you'd give it to me for Christmas. It's $800. And we said, well, sweetie, you've never taken a piano lesson in your life. Why would we buy you a keyboard? And he said, well, we got an old piano down in the living room that I play, or I used to play. You can bang around on that for a while. And he said, Mom, I don't need to do all that. He said, because come on over here to YouTube. This is a true story. And he pulled up Coldplay. And he said, let me show you what's happening with Coldplay. And he goes to the piano and he bangs out a few chords. He said, it's going to be, it's going to be really quick for me. I'm going to get it in a couple months. And all my friends are going to come over, and I'm going to play for them, and we're going to hang out. And I thought, you are like what is going on with you? You're out of your mind. And we're in the business. We do this all day, every day. 2 generations, 2 different times, 2 different messages from the culture, navigating life in 2 different ways. We had to sit him down and say, sweetie, it's not going to work this way. And even if we got you the keyboard, you wouldn't be playing it a month from now. We said, you peck around that piano. We'll get you some lessons if you get interested. Think he's playing today? No. Lost interest in about 2 weeks. Because there was that rapid fire media. There was something else to do. So this shift from intrinsic to extrinsic values, it sets up all kinds of problems in society. And with the children that you deal with, what you have to also understand is that when they are extrinsically motivated, it's very, very difficult to get them to just do something for themselves. Do something because it's the right thing to do. Do something because they understand the value of the work itself. They understand how it feels to accomplish a goal and how that helps you feel emotionally. The social and emotional payoff of a value system is very, very difficult to teach in an extrinsic world. Who knows what happens to extrinsic societies, ultimately? Yeah, they collapse. They collapse. And so when I say to you that we are living in a very interesting time, believe me, we are. People are worried about this, about what is going to happen if we keep going on this trajectory towards the extrinsic. I want to read you a quote from the book of The Road to Character. Today's teachers tend to look for students' intellectual strengths so they can cultivate them. But a century ago, professors tended to look for their students' moral weaknesses so they could correct them. Fascinating. If you look back at colleges in the early 1900s, that's what we saw. The early Girl Scout handbooks preached an ethic of self-sacrifice and self-effacement. How much of that you see right now. The chief obstacle to happiness, the handbook exhorted, comes from the overeager desire to have people think about you. And we're seeing narcissism scores through the roof. Okay, so what does that mean? What does that mean for you guys? And I'm about to wrap up. And schools, and what does that mean for individuals? The first thing we have to realize about kids is that they are social and emotional animals. We all are. We crave connection more than anything else as human beings. It's at our center. Our school system, at this point in our society, as I said at the beginning of the talk, may be the last institution that can have a kind of influence on change that we need. Why? Because A, you've got them as a captive audience. You've got kids in your school when we can get them to show up. You've got kids in your school that are a captive audience, and you can begin to build a culture in your school that is a counterculture to what is happening on the outside. We do a lot of that work across this country, and we have seen it work. We have seen it work over time. We have seen teachers have impact, principals have impact, school districts have impact, but you as a group have to start to elevate the conversation. We got to start talking about this stuff. We got to start talking about how we connect with kids again. What do you think is the number one reason that kids go to school? You guys know the answer to this. You're dropout prevention specialists, many of you. What's the number one reason kids go to school? So one person, huh? There you go. They want to be socially and emotionally connected. They do not go to school to learn math. And I will tell you, I have seen kids that are in horrific circumstances that will get themselves to school because someone is there that cares about them. I know a kid in New York, he gets up at 5 o'clock in the morning, leaves Staten Island, for any of you know New York City, which is way out in the boroughs of New York. He gets his brother fed and dressed. He gets on the subway, takes his brother to the south part of Manhattan, gets back on the subway, goes to his school up in the north part of Manhattan, does it every single day, does it twice a day, wouldn't miss it because he's in a program inside his school at Central Park East in Harlem where he has a group of caring, connected individuals around him who have his back. It's that simple. Now, how many of you work with parents trying to get the kids to school? How many of those parents had a great relationship with school themselves? We also have to begin to connect with the parents, but when we connect with the parents, it's not because your kid's bad or your kid's not coming to school. We connect with parents to provide them with support, with resources, with help, with information. How can we build systems in our schools that actually provide a support network for parents? Because the second thing school systems have is they have a common platform that has gone away in the village. The village is sick, but the school system does not have to be. The school system can be well. And the school system has now taken on a new role of reaching out their tentacles into the community. We see it all the time. And we're seeing it in big school districts that are doing all kinds of interesting programs. And the reality is that school systems now, the educational system, is no longer a reflection of the community. In many, many areas, it is leading the community. And unfortunately, like it or not, it's where we are. Complaining about it doesn't help. Saying, I've had it, doesn't help. I'm tired, doesn't help. I'm angry doesn't help. That quiet army has to push on. And our school systems have to begin to take leadership roles. And they are taking leadership roles, and they are doing it effectively. So number one is creating a system of culture and caring in your school, in your classroom, in your building. And the first step to creating that is looking for the resources and tools, talking to other people about it, elevating the conversation, mobilizing the movement, getting things going. The second thing is this: if I want to change your behavior, the research shows one thing must be present. And that doesn't matter husband, wife, parent, child, brother, sister. If I want you to do something different than you are doing now in a positive way, one thing has to be present. Who knows what that is? So if you were in the workshop yesterday, don't yell it out. What? Did I hear an answer? Trust. That's close. Relationship. What? I didn't hear that. Love. Okay, there you're swimming all around it. I have to be able to create an emotional connection with you. If I can't create an emotional connection with you, I cannot get it done. Learning is a relationship. Make no mistake about it. It's all about an emotional connection. Data does not change people's behavior. I had 4 pieces of bacon this morning. If data changed behavior, it wouldn't have been on my plate. We know the data. We know that data. What changes behavior is social and emotional connections, where we are engaged with these kids, where we are involved with these kids, where we are connected to these kids. So as you go out and read your research and look at all the studies, which I do a lot of, so I'm right there with you, for those of you that are in the research world, you must understand that all that matters because it gives you information, and all the things I just told you give you a context for what's happening. But what matters most is how you make them feel. Who said that? Maya Angelou. People will not remember you for anything other than how you made them feel. That emotional social connection is key. And you guys are the ones. I want you to think right now about the kids and the people that you have in your life that you can influence. We call that your span of control, your span of influence. You may not be able to change the district. You may not be able to change the whole school. You may not be able to change the country, for goodness sakes. You may not be able to change even the neighborhood. But there are areas of your life where you have an influence and a span of control. And at the end of the day, when we start connecting there, we bring them back in one after the other. Somebody asked Mother Teresa how to save the world. And she said, go home and take care of your kids. It's really not all that hard when you keep that front and center in your minds. Finally, for underserved populations, which we deal with a lot, and which I know you deal with a lot, you have to meet these kids where they are. You can't expect them to be what you want them to be. It is not about how we feel, what reward we're getting back. It is about how they feel. And if we can get them to school and get them connected, and in those schools build a caring culture that is based on intrinsic motivations and values, we win the war. So you guys, in closing, have never been more important, ever, than you are right now. Your jobs are critical, and people don't say thank you enough. But I'm here to tell you, I'm in schools every day. I'm in these processes every day. We're building school cultures. We're working with administrators to do this work. And you guys make it happen. Without you, it cannot get done. So in closing, I'd like to say there's an old Chinese curse that says, may you live in interesting times. We are there. They can be the best of times or the worst of times. It is our curse, but it could also be our blessing. Technology is not all bad. It levels the playing field. It gives us an opportunity to be creative. It's expanding learning beyond our belief. It gives us an opportunity to build relationships if we're doing it correctly. But whether it is our curse or our blessing depends on our choices, our commitment, and, interestingly, our complacency. Thank you very much. It's been great to be with you guys today.